There's no greater virus than a thought. That is just an incredibly powerful statement, isn't it? Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into the very real, often hidden danger of our own unchecked thinking. So often we completely obsess over external toxins. We worry about what we eat, what we breathe, the media we consume. We obsessively filter our water. We buy everything organic. But what if the absolute most toxic, hostile environment you experience every single day is actually that silent narrative playing on a loop right inside your own head? To really unpack this, we're exploring the core philosophy of Peter Crone. If you don't know him, he's widely known as the Mind Architect. He's a transformational coach, a human biologist, and honestly just a profound thinker who's worked with everyone from elite pro athletes to everyday people who are desperately looking for a bit of inner peace. I want you to ask yourself, why do you keep hitting the exact same walls in your relationships or maybe your career? Our goal today is to figure out exactly how our subconscious constraints, those invisible mental walls we didn't even realize we built, literally put a ceiling on our physical health and our ultimate potential. All right, let's map out our journey real quick. We'll start with the Mind Architect's origins, move into the concept of the fish in the tank, then uncover the 10 primal prisons, talk about upgrading the operating system, and finally look at attaining true inner freedom. Okay, Section 1. The Mind Architect's origins, the catalyst for exploration. So, Peter Crone's insights into the human condition. They aren't just dry academic theories. They were forged in some seriously profound, unthinkable personal adversity. At just 7 years old, he lost his mother. Then, exactly a decade later, at age 17, his father was tragically lost in the Herald of Free Enterprise ferry disaster. Crone was left completely alone, an orphaned teenager. But here is the amazing part. Rather than letting that acute, agonizing trauma dictate a life of victimhood, he used that intense grief as a crucible. He actually leaned into the pain to study human resilience, deep compassion, and the fundamental mechanics of why we suffer. And what makes his approach so incredibly effective today is this totally unique intersection of his studies. On one hand, Crone holds degrees in human biology and exercise physiology. But he merges that hard Western science with this deep, rich knowledge of Ayurveda and Eastern philosophy. Think about it for a second. Have you ever had a tension headache or a weird stomach issue that mysteriously flared up only when you were completely stressed out at work? Yeah, we all have. This isn't just about feeling good emotionally. It's a truly holistic approach that connects your physical, cellular biology with the energetic reality of your mind to hit the absolute root source of the suffering. Which leads us right into Section 2, the fish and the tank, visualizing the mind-body connection. To make this invisible mind stuff visible, Crone uses this brilliant analogy that completely separates the physical brain from the psychological mind. Look, if you ask someone to point to their mind, they'll almost always point to their skull, right? But actually, that's just the brain. Crone argues that the brain is like a fish, and the mind is the tank. When a fish gets sick, you don't just pump the fish full of meds, you've got to clean the water it's swimming in. The mind is the psychological environment that your physical brain lives in. You absolutely must clean the environmental tank of the mind instead of just trying to fix the physical hardware of the brain. To really drive this home, I want you to imagine living in a tiny little 600 square foot apartment. It looks gorgeous on the inside, but there is incredibly toxic black mold hidden right behind the drywall. You can eat all the organic kale in the world, you can do your morning cold plunges, take all your supplements, but that environment is eventually going to break you down. A self-deprecating internal narrative, constantly telling yourself you're not good enough or that you're a failure, acts exactly like that hidden mold. It is a hostile, inescapable environment that is constantly poisoning an otherwise perfectly healthy body. So the crucial takeaway here is that this chronic mental stress literally creates physical dis-ease. And if you break that word down, it literally means the absence of ease. When your inner dialogue is just constantly attacking you, it forces your physical body into a chronic sympathetic state. That's your classic fight, flight, or freeze mode. Your body spikes cortisol, your digestion essentially shuts down, your heart rate goes up. And when you're stuck in this defensive state, day after day, cellular rejuvenation just completely stops. Healing stops, period. Your mental environment is biologically dictating your physical health. All right, Section 3, the 10 primal prisons, uncovering subconscious constraints. So you're probably wondering, where exactly does this toxic mental environment even come from? Well, Crone identifies these invisible walls he calls the 10 primal prisons. Basically, they're deeply held, limiting beliefs that are almost always formed when we're super young. They are these absolute, heavy declarations like, I'm not enough, or I'm not safe, or I am not wanted. And the crazy part, these don't even necessarily come from massive trauma. Often, a child just misinterprets a busy, overworked parent as a clear signal that I am not wanted. And boom, that thought crystallizes into their adult reality. These narratives just run completely in the background, trapping us. Honestly, ask yourself right now, which one of these statements do you secretly relate to? To explain how these blind spots work against us, Crone leans heavily on this famous quote from psychologist Carl Jung: "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." It's so true. If you don't actively shine a bright spotlight on these subconscious prisons, you're going to blindly repeat the exact same painful patterns over and over again, all while shaking your fists at the sky, blaming bad luck, or blaming your partner or your boss. Crone actually shares a pretty shocking real-world anecdote of how this plays out. He worked with a woman whose unconscious childhood belief was that she was not wanted. Now, because the human mind can only really conceive what it already knows, she unconsciously superimposed that painful narrative right onto her future. And the result? Two entirely separate marriages that both ended in infidelity. Her subconscious wound was actively seeking out partners who would ultimately validate her core, twisted belief that she wasn't wanted. It's a wild, completely counterintuitive fact of human nature. Our ego will actually sabotage our own happiness just to prove itself right. Let's move to Section 4, upgrading the operating system, the method for liberation. So once we finally recognize these self-sabotaging patterns, how in the world do we fix them? Crone has a very precise 3-step method for rewiring this bad source code. Step 1 is awareness, actually identifying the specific subconscious root that's running your life. Step 2 is rigorous examination. This is where he uses direct linguistic deconstruction. He asks clients, is this belief actually an objective truth, or is it just an interpretation you randomly accepted as a kid? Like, did your dad ignoring you actually mean you are unlovable, or did it just mean your dad was stressed and distracted? Once you finally see the inherent flaw in the logic, you hit step 3, dissolution. The old program just stops running. People literally report feeling a physical weight lift off their shoulders. Which brings us to one of Crone's most famous phrases, and it's a real game changer. I don't solve problems, I dissolve them. Think about it. When you try to solve a problem, you're accidentally validating that the problem is real and needs fixing. But if the underlying belief, let's say that you weren't good enough, if that belief completely disappears, what happens to your crippling imposter syndrome at work? It doesn't need to be solved. It simply dissolves. The superficial problems in your relationships or your career just vanish on their own because the structural constraint that was holding them up is entirely gone. And that process builds a completely new way of living, a framework Crone calls the 2.0 world. Our old default programming, OS 1.0, is entirely driven by fear, survival, limitation, and this desperate need to defend our fragile ego. Living in OS 1.0 is just exhausting because you're constantly playing defense. But OS 2.0, that is the upgraded software. It's driven by true freedom, love, and boundless possibility. Upgrading to OS 2.0 shifts us from just barely surviving Tuesday to actively thriving in a state of creation. And finally, Section 5, attaining true inner freedom, stepping into the 2.0 world. As we step into this new world, Crone asserts that there is a strict binary choice. There is no gray area here. You are either a victim of circumstance or you are 100% responsible for your life. To step into true inner freedom, you have to completely abandon victimhood. And let's be real, this is a massively difficult pill for the ego to swallow. It requires so much courage. But you have to take total, radical responsibility for your experience, realizing that life isn't happening to you, it's happening through you, based entirely on your own perspectives. Part of taking that radical responsibility means dropping our ego's absolute addiction to always being right. And we all know how much we love being right? Crone points out that our ego desperately wants to predict the future just to feel safe. But finding real peace, that means accepting that life is inherently uncertain. It means fully letting go of our resistance to reality and embracing the incredible, liberating power of 3 very simple words. I don't know. When you finally stop fighting the universe just to prove you're right, you find absolute freedom. To truly heal, we have to surrender our old, limited, ego-driven identity. It can literally feel like a psychological death, but honestly, it's the only way to step bravely into the boundless essence of your true, limitless self. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this final, deeply provocative question from Crone to chew on. What part of your identity are you clinging to right now that is actually holding you back from truly living? Are you willing to let the idea of who you are die so the essence of who you are can live?